Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host. That's me, Scott Sinclair. Welcome to episode 188. And today we are going to talk about using crisis management techniques that I have learned in turnarounds and crisis management. We're going to apply those to personal and professional attacks because there is some commonality in those issues, and you can use some of the techniques that you learn from crisis management to help navigate and persuade your way out of a crisis, a personal attack that you might be in. Have you ever experienced a personal attack in your career, in your job, just in life, or maybe in a personal relationship? Have you experienced office politics, or even really aggressive office politics? Wrongful dismissal would be an example. Have you been slandered? Have you been libeled? Have you been defamed? What did you do about it? Did you go out and hire a lawyer? Or did you try to handle it yourself? Let's talk about that today. You know, as I was preparing for this show, it reminded me several years ago that Sinclair Range, my company, a predecessor company to Sinclair Range after we went through some mergers, I won't bore you with the details, but we had what we called managing directors as opposed to partners in a professional firm. And the managing directors of this company were providing consulting and turnaround services, and they were on a contract. And the contract had what we called an aggressive split. And so specifically, if you joined as a managing director of that firm, your contract said you went off and you found your own business and you generated your own revenue. You weren't getting it from the firm, what we would call in the business and eat what you kill. And the split was really aggressive. The managing director would keep 85% of their revenue. Now, it wasn't really, and the house would keep 15% of the revenue. Now, it wasn't really 85% because the idea was, let's say the client was paying, I don't know, $20,000. Let's make it an easier number, $10,000 a month. Now, let's make it $20,000 a month in retainer fees or work fees, and then there would be success fees for financing or restructuring or whatever. On top of that, if you were handling that file yourself without any analyst support, without the work of another MD, if you were doing all your managing director, if you were doing all your own research, if you weren't using the support network around you, well, then the split was 85-15. But if you needed the help of some of the analysts, if you wanted to share this with another managing director because it was a larger file, well, then there was an internal negotiation as to how the split would work. So, for example, if there was a $20,000 a month work fee being paid by the client, then there would be, and let's say he wanted to split with me we were going to work on this file together as another managing director, then we would say, okay, well, you take 10 and I'll take 10. And out of his 10, he would pay $1,500 to the house and keep $8,500. This is basically the way the splits worked under that contract. And this fellow was not performing. He had a client that, in fact, I gave to him because, this model wasn't really working. I was generating all the business as usual. And so I put him in charge of this deal, of this company, and he was taking out his work fee and remitting the 15% to the house. In fact, it went the other way. 100% of the money went to the house, and then we paid out 85% to the relevant managing director. And this guy was not performing. He wasn't showing up at the clients and doing the turnaround. Things weren't going well. He was an embarrassment to the firm. And then I found out that this turnaround, successful professional was borrowing money from the client. Now, let me give you a little pro tip here. If you're running a troubled business and you hired a high-priced consultant and you're paying $10,000, $20,000 a month plus success fees, and this guy comes to you, your high-priced consultant comes to you to borrow $800 for dinner and to pay his room, you've got a problem, okay? So I found out this guy was doing this, so I terminated the contract, which we had the right to do back in the day with those contracts. And after a while, this fellow wrote to me and demanded a bunch of money. He itemized some expenses, he itemized some this and that, the other thing, none of which he was due under the contract. And he said, you need to pay me all of this money, or here, and he put this in writing, here's a list of people that I'm going to write, and I'm going to tell them all sorts of bad things about you. And the bad things that he listed out, some of them were true, and some of them were not true. And when I say some of them were true, we all go through life, and sometimes things don't go as planned, certainly when you're my age and dealing in high-risk situations. And so he threatened to do that. And then he also had some other stuff he just made up about me. And he gave me a list specifically of important people that I work with and my contacts that he had been introduced to. And he said, you pay me this cash, or here's what I'm going to do with you and to you. And so I thought about that for a minute. Obviously, I never thought about paying him, and I decided to sue him. And, the lawyers would talk about that as being extortion or blackmail, but extortion, I think, under law. But then in the jurisdiction we are in, you don't want to say those sorts of things and be that aggressive, according to the lawyers. So it was a defamation lawsuit. And I specifically said to the lawyers, you sue him for a bunch of money, but I don't want to collect anything because this guy's a flake. He's a flake, and we're not going to collect any money from him. What I really want is full disclosure as to who he's talked to. I want a list of everybody he's actually talked to as opposed to threaten to talk to. I want a cease and desist on him. And if he breaks that cease and desist, then I want that monetary judgment, and I want to go after him, and we'll just bankrupt him. And anyway, so this guy settled, of course, because he had no leg to stand on. And that is how I handled that particular situation. Now, I happen to be in the position where I'm surrounded by some of the world's best lawyers, certainly some of Canada's best lawyers, and the U.S., but this was a Canadian situation, that particular situation, and they happen to be, some of my best friends and counsel to me, and so not everybody's in that position. It costs a lot of money to go hire lawyers of that capability to quash a weird situation like that. Another time, I understand that not everybody's in that situation wise and able to do that, which is why we're going to talk about some alternatives today and other ways that these things might be handled. In another situation, I remember there was an article in the Canadian Globe and Mail, which, from a U.S. perspective would be similar to the Wall Street Journal, but in Canada, and there was a full page investigative report. Can we put it that way? A full-page investigative report on a corporate titan battle that had nothing to do with me. It was one financial institution fighting with another hedge fund fellow, and it went on and on and on. There was all sorts of horrible allegations. But in the middle of that article, they dropped my name, my personal name, as being some sort of puppet master of one of these financial institutions and titans, which was just complete nonsense, and was a slander, was a defamation, now conducted by a newspaper. And so I don't know the laws and what I would have been able to do there or not to do, but I can tell you that Bay Street, which is the Canadian Wall Street, was up in arms. I received numerous text messages and phone calls the day that article came out, letting me know about it and telling me I couldn't let that stand and I had to go after them and go after the paper, go after the reporter personally. And I thought about that and I thought, fuck it. I'm not going to deal with this situation. Sometimes any news, I don't want to say it's good news, but it makes you relevant. It makes you relevant in the space. And they were not fair allegations, but they also weren't terribly damaging in my opinion. And they got my name out in the newspaper. I could have dragged that out through a lawsuit, but I just didn't want to spend the money. I was busy at the time and whatever. So I decided to move on with that. The point of me telling you stories is this sort of stuff happens. If you are in business, if you're an executive, an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter what level you are at. You need to figure out how you're going to handle these sorts of situations when they arrive, because they will arrive. They will arrive, and they happen over and over and over again. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get there, let me give you a little preamble. As you know, we have gone through a rebranding on this podcast. We are now the Winning Momentum podcast with your host, that's me, Scott Sinclair. We used to be Martinis with Scott. You can find all of the old content on YouTube. You can look at the Winning Momentum podcast channel on YouTube. You can search that, or you can go to wherever podcasts are released, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all of those platforms. I think you'll find our content. And this show This show is geared to who? It's geared to entrepreneurs. Did you know that as an entrepreneur, did you know the stats that 90% of new businesses will never, ever, ever pay their founder a living wage? Never. You'd never get, 90% of them never get a living wage out of that business. I don't know how you define failure, but that's however you define it. There's a significant, really large odds are you're going to failure rate when launching a new business. And of the 10% that do survive and pay their founder a living wage, a huge chunk of those never create an exit to create wealth, right? So they will pay their owner manager, their entrepreneur, their founder, they'll pay them a salary and perhaps even a good salary. Perhaps they could have a great life, support their family, buy a house, raise their kids, have a great life, but they never create the wealth and independence that many entrepreneurs are hoping for. That's an even slimmer margin for success. So on the show is for entrepreneurs to try to help those odds. And if you do the math on it, you can help a lot of people. If we could even improve those odds by say 1%, that would be a pretty terrific thing. So there's one of the reasons for this podcast. If you're an owner manager, what is an owner manager? This is somebody who owns their business and manages it. So really, at one point, they were an entrepreneur, or the generation before them, their father or grandfather was more than likely, but possibly grandmother or mother was an entrepreneur, and now they're running the business. They own it, they manage it, and they're past the startup. But they may be struggling, or they may be looking for an exit to create wealth for themselves, and they're just not in a position to do that, and they don't know how to get the company from here to there so that they can sell the business. This show is for you. This show is for executives. If you are running a mid-market, smaller business and you've hit a crisis, you've hit a trouble patch when things are not going well, almost every business runs into trouble at some point. I don't know if you know, I think it's on my website, but even Apple, probably the most successful company in the history of the world, correct? Even Apple at one point was nearly bankrupt, or was going bankrupt, until Steve Jobs went to Microsoft and negotiated a loan through, I think they purchased pref shares, if memory serves me correct. The point being, almost every business runs into trouble at some point. And this show is about helping you navigate that. So it's great for executives, it's great for students as well, professionals, young professionals learning their career, students in finance and business. That's who this show is for. And as I said, it's now the Winning Momentum podcast. And the idea there is that you turn negative momentum into positive momentum in your business and your life. And with momentum, you can start to attract resources. You get more energy. You attract financial resources. People want to invest in you when things are going in a positive direction. You attract human resources. People want to work for you when you're moving in a positive direction. And that's what this show and this content is about. A little notification. I've been teasing this now for several shows. And by the way, you regular listeners will know I took 2 weeks off as we completed the rebranding and launched my new website. It was great for me to recharge and take a couple of weeks off producing content and the pressures and stress of that. So I'm excited to get back at it. This is the new show the first show after my little break. But we have the new website out, is TheScottSinclair.com. So the Scott, S-C-O-T-T, Sinclair, SINCLAIR.com, TheScottSinclair.com. The website is up, it's running, it's available to the public. It's not great. It's got quirks and problems with it that we're working through. But check it out. And on there, you'll be able to subscribe to a newsletter. You'll get notifications of new content coming through. You'll see things that you haven't seen on just the YouTube, if that's where you've been following us, or just on the podcast channels. But you will see it there as well. You can go see our shows. There'll be links to the YouTube channel. I just posted an article there today, in fact, on the similar topic. But if you like to read instead of listen to podcasts or watching the YouTube video show, there's an article posted there. And so I'm excited about that. We're going to get the We're going to have a bunch of content on that website, and that's going to support, hopefully, my speaking engagements and a bunch of other things. So there you go. Other big news, which you will have noticed if you're listening to this, is the predecessor show to this before we rebranded was Martinis with Scott, where on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, the concept was we would sit down and have a martini, usually with a guest, or sometimes with a guest. It went back and forth between me solo and having guests, and we'd have a martini and talk about issues that you might find interesting and relevant. And so for a couple of years, that's what we did. As I was learning about podcasting and getting content out, it's been such an amazing experience. But that time has gone. So now with the rebranding, with the Winning Momentum podcast, we're changing the release time to Tuesday mornings. And I'm not sure exactly what time that would be, probably 6 a.m., 7 a.m. Eastern, somewhere around there. So Tuesday morning, you're driving to work, you have something to listen to. And of course it's on the library, so you can watch it or listen to it anytime you want, but there is a new release time. So don't sit around Thursdays at 4 anymore. I'm not coming. I will be drinking a martini, but I will not, here, I could do that. I will be drinking a martini, but I will not be there live with you or releasing a show at that particular time. And lastly, just as to talk about the concept of the Winning Momentum podcast, I'm going to try to alternate between me solo, as I'm doing right now, where I can walk through patiently a more technical topic, or a persuasive topic, which is part of the content. So that'll be 1 week. And then the next week, we're going to have more of a discussion interview format with really some terrific guests we've got lined up. And when you're shooting podcasts, things happen that you hadn't thought about. Like, for example, I just sat on my reading glasses as I sat down here to do this show for you and smashed them. So I'm a little bit blind. And then my laptop just ran out of battery as I was speaking right here, but we're good. We're good. I've got this all covered, I believe. So, we're going to do some interviews with some terrific guests, and that's going to bring a bunch of value to you, I believe. All right, let's get on with the topic. Crisis management response to personal and professional attack. So what would you do? I just want you to think about this scenario and wonder to yourself, how would you handle it? What would you do if just when you're working for a company and just when you're about to land a big contract, you're on the sales and marketing side, you're about to land a large contract that will pay you a bunch of commissions, so you'll get a good check out of this, and just before you land that contract, you're defamed by your boss, you're threatened, and then you're terminated. And start to finish, this whole defamation, threat, and termination happens in about 4 days. It just hits you completely out of the blue. You're shocked by it and blindsided, I guess is the right word. How would you handle that? And I know what you're thinking. This happens to all salespeople, right? You're working for a company, you got the big commission coming in, and then you're terminated and you say, hey, you guys, you fired me so you didn't have to pay me this commission, and then you run to your lawyer, which you probably should, and you try to collect. You make that allegation and you try to collect more than the severance that you have been offered. And I can tell you that I have been on the other side of that discussion. I've been with companies and working for companies, and you want to terminate an employee relationship. You want to fire the salesperson or what have you. And then just as you're about to do it and you're in a meeting and someone says, damn, this fellow or this woman's just about to bring in a large contract, and here's what's going to happen. They're going to go to the lawyer and they're going to claim that they deserve these commissions. And, it just always happens with somebody in the sales and marketing side, that there's never a good time for this sort of parting of the ways. So, but what if this happened to you? What if there was defamation involved? What if there was slander of your character, a smear campaign, a threat that then turned into termination? Would your first thought to be to run to legal counsel, to run to a lawyer and to sue your former employer? Well, maybe you should. I'm not a lawyer. I just want to say that up front. And you should at least talk to one for sure. Okay. But you need to know, I'm not talking badly about lawyers when I say this, but you need to go into any litigation or any legal situation with your eyes wide open. litigation can be expensive, and it is often unproductive, right? Expensive and unproductive. And so if you know that up front, how else might you deal with this situation? How might you process the information and respond to the attacks on your current and future livelihood? How might you go about that? So let's talk about a story from in the recent weeks that was brought to me. And I'm going to talk about a woman who I will call Mary. Longtime listeners of the show will know that Mary is our alias for everybody because we don't like to disclose real names. And nothing in this story is intended to be interpreted as completely factual or a representation of real events. I'm not trying to out anybody. I'm trying to use a real life experience that I've been through to provide value to you and a way to think about things. Okay. And I always try to do that on this show. It's part of my content, right? I'm not one of those social media coaches who hasn't lived it. I do this every day, this stuff, and I try to use real life experiences because I think they're more relevant and I think they're more genuine and I think that they add more value to you. But I'm not trying to out anybody with it, so don't even try. Don't even try to figure this out. Anyways, Mary, quote unquote, recently experienced this exact same situation that I have described to you. She was hired less than a month ago as a contractor. So she had a contract, not an employee, a contract. And if you've had any experience in hiring or being an employee, you'll know there's a big difference in law between a contractor and an employee. An employee often has very, very, very many more. That was great English, right? An employee often has much more protection under the law than a contractor does. A contractor has a contract, and whatever the contract says more or less goes. So Mary was hired as a contracted service provider to a high growth company. What is a high growth company? Let's just call it a tech company. It wasn't, but that sort of thing. You know, you expect this thing to go from zero to a lot in revenue, profits, and value in relatively short order. And her job, she was hired or contracted to lead certain areas of revenue growth. Specifically, she was hired to bring her significant network of real people and influencers. So, you know, in the real world and in the digital world, to bring her network so that her network could buy the company's products in a B2B fashion or influence sales of the company's products in a B2C, a business to consumer, direct to consumer fashion, as one might do with a bunch of influencers. And so that was what she was contracted to do. And Mary reported directly to an officer of the company. So she had a boss, okay? And that boss had known Mary from prior jobs. They'd worked together on a bunch of things. And then the boss got the job at the high growth company. And the boss said, hey, we should hire her and contract this person, Mary, to bring in these influencers and to sell a bunch of product. And so they did. They entered into a contract as recommended by Mary's direct boss, who is or was an officer of that corporation. So 2 weeks into her new contract, Mary felt like she was performing well. She loved the association with this exciting new company. The income was important to her. She had a decent monthly fee coming out of the contract. And as service providers do, she had passed on other opportunities in order to focus on this contract. If you provide a service to businesses, you can only pick and choose so many clients. You have to be able to perform. You want to pick the ones that you're interested in, that you're passionate in, that there's a high margin and a good fee going along with that. And so she was really excited about this. And I just think there should be some context on who Mary is here. She's a very young but competent professional. Well, not very young compared to the audience, just very young compared to me. Let's just call her a young professional, highly competent. And she rolls in a jet-setting lifestyle, ultra successful, high living crowd is her crowd. And so despite her age, she brings with her a really terrific network of potential purchasers and influencers digital influencers to this type of situation. And so in very short order, in a couple of weeks, she had approached all of her network or the relevant parts of her network, as she had promised to do in her contract. And she had introduced the network directly to the company. And there seemed to be some real traction between the company and Mary's network. Okay. Now, if you're an influencer, or if you manage influencers, or if you've been around long enough, you know exactly what's going to happen next. Mary delivered the value of the network to the company. And with that being delivered, Mary's boss then decided to get rid of her, right? It happens all the time. Her boss decided to push her out. Now, the contract that Mary had, which was her first and was the real problem in all of this situation, had a termination clause that allowed either party, Mary or the company, but the relevant part being this company, to terminate her anytime, immediately, without further obligation. So they don't have to provide a reason. They could just wake up in the morning, they could say, Mary, your contract's terminated. And because it's terminated, we don't have to pay you anything else ever again. We don't have to pay the next monthly fee. We don't have to give you 2 weeks notice. We don't have to give you 3 months notice. We don't have to pay commissions on the network on what your contacts may purchase from us or influence. We don't have to pay anything. We can just terminate you. So that's what her contract said. And she should not have signed that contract, but that's a different story. She didn't have any advice on that. What she should have done, by the way, is negotiate a trailer. And all salespeople should do that. You should give me so much. So what is a trailer? So you should give me, I'm bringing my network to you, so there should be 3 months severance or notice period or what have you. And then there should be a trailer on commission. So the people that I introduce to you, for the, whatever they buy for the next 3 months after I'm gone, I still get commission on that. Or for a year after I'm gone, I still get a commission on that. That's called a trailer. So you've already left, but you're still earning money from the company because you delivered the value and then they got rid of you. That should have been in the contract, but it wasn't. The point being, she could have been terminated at any time for any reason. And if Mary's boss wanted to get rid of her, all she had to do was write a 1-paragraph email saying, hey, you're out. Period. That's it. But instead, her boss chose a different path. What she did was one midnight, she called, the boss called Mary, and the boss was clearly drunk. I wasn't on the call, but what I'm told is the boss was inebriated. And she said to Mary that she had compromising material of Mary, which was not true. And that Mary had, and furthermore, not only did she have compromised material of Mary, she claimed, but that she said that Mary also had legal clients that were in a legal but unsavory line of work, and that this high growth company could not be associated with that. And so you might ask yourself, well, Scott, how do you know that the compromising material alleged against Mary is not true? And the answer is, it was sent to me. It was sent to me, and it's clearly not true. It clearly has nothing to do with Mary. I'm going to tell you why it was sent to me in a second. It's such a sordid affair. But it's clearly not her. But the second allegation was that Mary's other clients, some other clients, were influencers in a legal but line of work that this company didn't want to be associated with. And that part was true, by the way. That part is true, except the boss, the person that recommended to hire Mary, knew about these other clients when she recommended the company hire Mary. In fact, she helped Mary work and market on those other clients. And so it's a complete sham for her to say, well, we just found out about this and now we need to terminate you. And so in private text messages, so she called her one midnight, clearly inebriated or not thinking properly. And in private text messages, of which I've seen screenshots, and the text messages were not intended to be formal correspondence from the company. This is just from the boss to Mary directly. It accused her of serious and unsavory behavior. And the boss demanded that Mary three things. One, immediately resign from her contract. So remember, this is a brand new contract for Mary. The money's important to her. She's loving the relationship. She's already delivered the value of her network, and she not gave up, but she declined other opportunities to make money to work for this company. So now the boss is saying you need to immediately resign from your contract, number one. Number two, don't ever discuss this now or at any time in the future with the CEO of the company. So the boss's boss. You got to ask yourself why. Remember, there was a contract that said that Mary could be terminated at any time for any reason whatsoever. There was no need to go through this if all you wanted to do was get rid of Mary. So condition number two, or demand number two, was that Mary just never talk to the CEO ever again. And demand number three is that Mary never ever communicate with her network that was introduced to the high growth company ever again. So basically, and that, by the way, was not in the original contract. There was no ownership of the network, of the referral base dealt with in that contract. And so the boss laid out in writing 3 demands: quit, don't ever talk to the CEO, don't ever talk to your network again. And if you do not, the text messages said, if you don't concede to these demands, the boss threatened in a written text message to spread the smear to Mary's other clients and ruin her business. Okay, so that was in writing. It was, if you don't do this, I'm going to say and distribute this material, which is not you, by the way. She didn't say that, but it's clearly not Mary. But I'm going to send this to your other client base, and I'm going to ruin your business and allege that it's you, and you need to do these things, okay? So I'm not a lawyer. I told you that before, but to me, that's clear extortion, right? It's certainly defamation, but a clear extortion. If you don't do this thing of monetary value, I'm going to damage you in this sort of way. And my reading of the law and the jurisdiction where this happened is that it's probably criminal extortion, and there seems to be serious case law on that matter. Again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trying to allege that. I'm not even giving you names and real people, but that was certainly my reading and research. And of course, I do have a great lawyer base, so I talked to some of them, and that's what I was told. So at this point, I just want to take a step aside and say, because you may be asking yourself, Scott, why are you so interested in this mess and this crap? And how do you know, like, why are people sending you materials? Well, I will say that, first of all, with respect to Mary, I'm one of Mary's other clients, not one of the unsavory other clients, but she does work in marketing for a number of my companies. I've met this person. She does a terrific job for us. She does a lot of the branding for my Instagram and other things. And so she's a great person. I like her, and I just find her to be a straight up credible person. And she works for me. Also, I happen to know her boss. Her boss is also somebody, coincidentally, that used to work for me, and I found her at the time perhaps a little bit unstable. I don't want to talk negatively about anybody, and really it wasn't me. I didn't work with her day to day, but my other people, my management team, worked with her day to day, and bottom line is they drove her out of the company because they couldn't deal with her. So I was presented with this situation of someone who I rely on for some of my marketing and branding work being attacked by someone who I know I just know her. I just know her stability and some of the issues that she goes through. And so I was interested in that, but not nearly as much as another point, which is that the boss that threatened Mary by text message in writing said in writing in a text message that her first call to smear Mary was going to be to Scott. It was going to be to me. So she dropped my name in one of these text messages, and I was being used as a pawn in a low-grade extortion scheme. At least it seems that way to me. And I'll just give you a little heads up. I don't know. Those of you that know me and know me pretty well would know that I'm not a very good pawn. It doesn't work out very well if you're trying to use me as a pawn in your little scheme. And so that really twigged my interest and got me involved in this file. So Mary called me on a Friday, to discuss this matter and to seek my advice. So that was the first that I had heard of it. And she sent me the material that was being alleged She walked me through, she sent me screenshots of the text messages, and she was obviously very, very upset. And, spade to spade, she was calling me basically she was seeking advice, but she was also protecting her business because I'm an employer of hers, and it's a decent contract for her. And so she wanted to get to me first, which was smart on her part. Although, as I said, I know both parties, and I would have chosen Mary anyways, because she's, in my personal view, the credible one in this situation. So Mary was very upset. And my first piece of advice to her was she had to act immediately, because it was a Friday and there was no way in hell that the boss who was taking this action was just going to chill over the weekend and we'd all pick up pens Monday morning. That's not going to happen. She had to get on this right now. She needs to get in front of the issue. She needs to start talking to the CEO. She needs to explain her story and frame this in a way that's favorable and truthful. And she didn't do any of that. She did other stuff for the weekend. And so Monday morning, sure enough, she got an email from the company, from the CEO, and her contract was terminated. And of course, because the contract says nothing about, because you don't have to give an explanation in the contract, the termination just said, thanks for all your help and we're canceling the contract. And that was it. Okay. No reference to the defamation or the unsavory conduct or anything along those lines. So what would you do? What would you do in that situation? You've been fired. You've delivered your network to this third party and you didn't get paid for it. You've been defamed. You feel like that was unfair and untrue, and you've been threatened. You've been threatened basically that if you don't go away, the rest of your livelihood in the future will be ruined forever. That's basically the threat. How would you handle that? Well, what we're going to do is talk about 5 tips to consider as to maybe how you can persuade and try to deal with this without legal counsel. Again, you should talk to your lawyer. You should at least get some advice and then think seriously about whether you want to write the check for that. But I'm going to tell you how we handled it. And I helped Mary do this. And before we do, though, I want to talk to you about a ladder mount. And if I were more professional at this business, I would have a physical ladder mount in my hand to show you, but I don't. But do you remember the last time you climbed an extension ladder? Maybe you needed to rescue a lost toy from the roof. You had to paint the trim around the window, clean the gutters. You know the routine. You strategically find the best place to position the ladder, but still end up scratching and denting the gutter. When you finally pluck up the courage to venture up, you grip the ladder tight, praying that it doesn't wiggle, trying desperately to push the thoughts of falling out of your head. The stats on homeowners in the U.S. climbing ladders and falling and being injured and taken to the hospital are just astonishing. I'm going to get the number wrong. And if my computer hadn't died, I would have looked it up for you. But I think it's about 600,000 people a year. It's just insane. It's a lot of people that just fall off their ladder trying to put up Christmas lights or whatever. Well, introducing the ladder mount. And if I had it here in front of you, you would see a really cool yellow plastic thing that hangs from the gutter. And then you lean the top of your ladder against it and it stabilizes it. And it also protects the gutter from scratching and denting. The one-of-a-kind gutter guard slips easily into place using a broom pull from the safety of the ground. Ladder mount is designed to fit standard gutters, can easily be placed over gutter brackets. You'll notice the difference as soon as you begin to climb. The ladder mount provides a stable base for your ladder, giving you the confidence to climb safely. Home do-it-yourselfers love this thing, and it can be found at all leading retailers in the do-it-yourself space. But better than that, just go to roofersworld.com, ROOFERS world, WORLD.com, or roofersworldstore.com. You will see the ladder mount there, and you can order it. You can order it and get yourself, order a bunch of these things, hand them out to your friends, and be safe. Be safe when climbing a ladder. Okay. How are you going to handle this termination, defamation, threats? What are you going to do? I want to give you 5 points to think about. Number 1, remove emotion. You have to remove the emotion and again, these ideas are taken from crisis management. They're taken from turnaround management. And if you think about Mary, this is a crisis. This is a crisis. It feels like an employment issue. It feels like a contractual issue. It feels like a defamation issue. But this is an attack on her current and future livelihood. It is a crisis. It does make sense. It does make sense that that tips and tools of crisis management would be useful in this situation. So number one, remove emotion. Crisis management requires objective priorities and action. You will not succeed if you're distracted by fear, if you're distracted by hate, if you're distracted by questions like, why the hell is she doing this to me? Which was a significant part of my conversation with Mary on that Friday, that she called me improperly. So, she considered her boss a friend. Now she's being attacked. None of the stuff is true, to the extent that there was some true. The boss already knew about it when they hired her. Why is she doing this to me? Logical question, but unhelpful. You need to focus. You need to have objectives, and you need to act. You need to remove the emotion from this because, bluntly, that was Friday. Mary had like Saturday, Sunday to act. She had 2 days to deal with this, to save that position, which didn't get done. So find a way to remove the emotion. If you can't do it yourself, okay, I'm an expert at these situations. Even I find it difficult sometimes. If you can't do it yourself, get somebody to help you. By the way, when you hire a lawyer, that's 80% of their job. 80% of their job is that they're not you. They call the other lawyer who's not their client. So now the two lawyers are just talking. They were, past the bar together, or they're colleagues in the same profession, and they just shoot the shit and have a non-emotional conversation. And they've done this a million times before, and they just know what the answer is, and they agree that that's the answer, and sort of argue back and forth a little bit without emotion. And that's the value of hiring somebody like a lawyer. But you can do that. You can do that without a lawyer. You can do it with a mentor. You can do it with somebody like me, which is what Mary did. Find a way to get rid of the emotion, or you will not move forward. Number two, forget root causes. It just drives me nuts. You hear this on the news all the time these days. Root causes. What's the root cause of this problem? What's the root cause of that problem? For the most part, who cares? Who cares? Understanding root causes, if you're trying to deal with a systemic, long-term, recurring issues, you kind of might want to look at what the root causes are of those long-term recurring issues are, and deal with some of the root causes so that they stop recurring. That's fair, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a crisis, and in a crisis, you need to act now. You don't need to understand root causes. You need to act on the crisis, right? I always think, well, if you're trying to get to work today, and you can't because your intersection that you have to go through is blocked with a major car accident, right? Cars are crashed up everywhere. You can't get through. You can't get to work. Do you need to know the root cause of the accident? Or do you just need the cars towed? Right? If this happens every morning, maybe it'd be good to know the root cause. But if it just happened this morning, all you need is someone to clear the cars away so you can get to work. Mary kept asking about the boss's motivation. Clearly this was personal. If it wasn't personal, the boss would have just pulled the trigger on the termination clause of the contract. That's not what she did. She went through this whole rigmarole for whatever reason, trying to smear Mary and dragging my name into it as well. And so something else was going on there. And you got to be curious why. I'm curious why right now. I'm just sitting here curious. Why would this person do this? But who cares? It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the crisis. Solving the crisis is moving on to action and believing what is said to you, which is my third point. Don't disregard threats. What does that mean? I always tell people, I always think to myself, when anyone threatens you, when anyone says something negative, they're going to do something negative to you, you need to assume they're telling the truth 100% of the time, right? Sometimes a threat is just a threat. It's not the truth. It's just a threat. It's intended to elicit a certain response. It's intended to make you feel uncomfortable. It's just malevolent. It's blackmail. It's intended to do something. But at the end of the day, a lot of the time it's just a threat. But sometimes it's not just a threat. And it's tempting when you receive such a threat to think to yourself, it's just a threat. They don't really mean it. That's never going to happen. It's just talk. They're not going to send around compromising material of somebody else and claim it's me. Who would ever do that? But your best bet 100% of the time is to assume when someone threatens you with something negative, assume it's true. By the way, there's a corollary to that, if that's the right word. If someone says they're going to do something positive for you, just be skeptical. But the negative side, 100% of the time, you need to assume that it's true. And then, point number 4, you need to act now, like right now. That's part of being a crisis. Perception is reality. Okay, remember that. Perception is reality. I talk about on this podcast, we'll do it a bunch more. We talk about confirmation bias all the time. Confirmation bias is how the human brain works. It does not look at a set of facts and make a decision. It does not look at this compromising material that's alleged to be about Mary and this, her client base, which is true about Mary, and then the fact that the boss is a crazy person, and evaluate all those facts and arrive at a decision. That's not what happens. That's not how the human brain works. The human brain has a position, a filter, a way of viewing the world, and it's locked in early. And then what it does is it searches for facts to validate that bias. And it amends facts to confirm that bias as well. So something that, isn't directly against the bias, but it sort of could be interpreted either way. Well, it's interpreted 100% of the time to confirm the bias. And then the brain ignores all facts to the contrary, just flat out ignores them. All right. And so that's what confirmation bias is. It's a human brain creating a position, creating a filter, creating a bias, and seeking facts. And that's the meaning behind perception is reality. Okay. And so what you need to do is act now and get in front of that. The perception here, the bias here, is that Mary is a bad person involved in some unsavory business. And the brain is going to look for facts to support that. And it's going to ignore facts that go against that. All right. And so action has to be taken right away. And specifically the action here is you have to reframe the issue. You have to do it early and you have to do it often. Reframe the issue. What does that mean? If your reputation is being damaged and your livelihood is attacked, you need to frame the story before the misinformation becomes reality in people's mind. And you need to do that through truth without condition. And so, if there's something negative said about me that is true, a screw up that I've done in my past life, and someone says, hey, my past career, if someone says, hey, was that you? My answer is yes. My answer isn't, it was me, but you didn't understand the context. It was this, that, and the other thing. My answer is no, it wasn't me. My answer is yes, period. And I stop talking. And if someone wants more information, I then have thought about how I will reply to that. And I'll say, well, I'm not trying to mitigate this. It is what it is. Here's a couple of things that maybe you could think about, okay? And I will say that 100% of the time, I've never had an issue with that, right? So people have asked me that question when they're doing due diligence about hiring me. What about this issue? I read this in the paper, or, whatever. And that's the way that I've handled it. You need to reframe things with brutal truth without condition. And I think that's your best bet. And I think that is how you act on something right away. And my last point, my fifth point here, is you need to take the high road, okay? And what does take the high road mean? It means say and do things in your discussions about this matter that any reasonable person, even someone outside of this emotional situation, that any reasonable person would agree is fair and reasonable. So say and do things that everybody would agree is fair and reasonable, and don't say and do things that someone might think is not fair and reasonable. That is taking the high road. So you don't sink to the level of the other person, of the boss in this case, because if you do, 100% of the time, that just turns into a lose-lose, right? It just turns into a negative battle, and you're tarred with everything. My father, when I was a kid, used to tell me not to get in an argument with an idiot because people might confuse who is who. Same sort of thing. Take the high road, and it may not be satisfying. It may not be satisfying in the moment, but across time, that is the right thing to do. Mary did not, in this situation, personally attack the boss. that had attacked her. She didn't threaten the company after we had discussed it. Instead, she took the high road. And the high road is she wanted to remove her emotion from it. So I stepped in. I personally called the CEO of this business. Actually, I sent him a message and he asked me to call him. I talked to the CEO, a really good guy, by the way. I think these are good, credible people with a great company, except for the boss. But I spoke with the CEO and we both agreed that extortion was a bad thing, right? Hard to disagree with that. We both agree. And not that, hey, your employee extorted my employee. It wasn't that. It was just that in general, extortion is a bad thing. We all agreed. We agreed that using my name in an extortion scheme is also a bad thing. He was not pleased that his officer of his company did that. We both agreed that that was the wrong thing and shouldn't be done. And we both agreed that litigation sucks for everyone. Those are all high roads, right? Nobody, reasonable person, could disagree that you shouldn't extort somebody else, that you shouldn't have dropped my name, a complete outsider, in this messed up situation, and that everybody agrees that litigation sucks. Somebody's trying to walk into my podcast studio here. But so that is taking the high road. And in this case, Mary was able to apply those principles. And at the end of the day, she didn't fight over the termination because it was already done. I wish we had saved that, but we didn't. We didn't act fast enough. So the termination was done. She didn't fight that, and she did not personally attack her. Instead, she professionally communicated the situation to the company, to the CEO, and in the end, we were able to negotiate reasonable accommodations with which she is happy, beyond what the contract said. And so, she set out her priorities, her objectives. I wrote them down here on my whiteboard, and we talked about them a couple of times, and we hit those. We could have done better, but we did fine. We did fine on this, okay? So this is what happens in business. It happens all the time. It happens in life. How are you going to deal with it when that occurs? Consider these principles. And I'll just go through the 5 for you again. Remove your emotion from the situation. Forget root causes. Move on to action. Don't disregard threats. Somebody's saying something negative about you. Just assume it's true and act accordingly. Act now. Get in front of this thing before the confirmation bias sets in and take the high road. It's not satisfying. I can promise you it's not satisfying, but across time, it is the right thing to do. And it turned a horrible situation into an okay situation for Mary. So it does work. And that's it. That's all I had for you today. So I want to thank you for listening to the Winning Momentum podcast with me, Scott Sinclair. Remember, check out TheScottSinclair.com. The new website, subscribe, comment, send me some questions or some things that you would like me to discuss on this show or some guests you would like me to interview. It'd be cool to get that feedback, and let's see what we can do with that. And I will talk to you next week.